What do you all think of the fact that Noah's been on the boat for over a year? And we talked a little bit at the end of the lesson last week about what it must have been like when that door came down and the family stands in the doorway looking out over. It's something incredibly different than what it looked like when the door was shut the year plus earlier. So Noah comes out that door, hits the ground, and gets drunk as a skunk. What do we think about that? Oh, okay. That's what I want to, because we're going to get to Noah getting drunk. But I opened with that comment because that is the most common misconception of the flood story. That the grapes went bad in the boat. Noah comes out of the ark. They have a big party because they survived. He gets drunk, and we know the rest of the story, which is complete nonsense. None of that happened. And we're going to look at that this morning on what actually happened around Noah's inebriation, if you will. What we are also going to look at this morning is what did happen. What do you think some of what was going through Noah and his family initially when they came out but what are some things you think were going through their minds? Or even, they might even been saying to each other. Yeah. Yeah, Noah, this is a fine kettle of fish. Yeah, there goes one of the Joneses. Yeah. No, so what do we think? I mean, they had to have had some thought on this. First of all, locked up for a year plus with some pretty smelly animals, and the door comes down. What do you think the air was like when that door came down? It was like something they'd never smelled before. You ever think about that? That's not the air they were smelling before, and it has nothing to do with the animals. The green vapor is gone, and for the first time they smell what we smell when there's rain coming, or rain has been here and gone, that ozone concoction, whatever it is, that, the fresh rain smell. That would have been the first time they would have ever sensed that. Be interesting. It's the first time they've ever seen a blue sky. We mentioned that the other day. Clearly, the earth as they knew it doesn't look the same. It's off its axis. They're not going to know that, but it's off its axis. We've got earthquakes and ruptures and fissures everywhere possible. Every living thing is gone but them and what's on that ark. Yeah, so what do you think? What do you think?
One of the first things that happened is God told Noah that, okay, now all these animals are going to be afraid of you.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that too, but that they don't know that yet. I'm talking about when they're standing in that door, looking out. What are they thinking? Put yourself in Noah's shoes for a minute, or his sons. God is real. That's what they're thinking. Can you imagine that for 100+ years, Noah has been telling everybody this weird thing called rain and flood is coming, and I'm building this odd-looking thing because God's going to judge the world, and they have just lived through that? Do you think they didn't come out of there with faith in God beyond anything you can probably even comprehend? Wow, look what God did. I'm guessing, we have to guess, we don't know, the Bible doesn't tell us, but I'm thinking when you come to that door and they think back on their life a year ago versus a year now and how God's brought them through that. We ever had experiences like that? Where we had a life and then something traumatic happened to us, and then life as we knew it was completely different, and we knew it wouldn't be the same anymore after that, and God brought us through that change? I bet we've all had some experience like that at some point. But here you are, the only humans on the face of the earth, because God said you were righteous enough that he would save you from judgment, and God said he was going to judge, and look, he did. Is God real or what? I'm thinking it would just take your breath away to be standing in that doorway realizing what God just did for you. Absolutely incredible. What a beginning for a new population of the earth. And you would think, with that experience, boy, they're going to toe the line. They are going to listen to every word God says. They're going to follow everything God says. Didn't happen to play out that way, though, did it? But what incredible. Yeah, and like you say, talk about survival of the fittest. You have to be able to take care of yourself and your children, and any children that are now going to be born as a result of activity on the ark, the animals for what you can do for them. And there is no 7-Eleven. You got what's on that boat. It wouldn't surprise me. I don't know this either, but it wouldn't surprise me that you would take material off the boat to build a house or to build a fire or to, who knows what, But self-sufficient they would have to have been. Now, of course, God's with them. He's going to make sure that they get through this. He wouldn't have done this just to have them fail, which is what the Jews think when God brings them out of Egypt and brings them up to the edge of the water. Oh, you brought us here just to kill us instead of back there. God didn't do that. The other thing this shows us is that God is a God of reconciliation. He brings judgment. He always does. And then he reconciles himself and his people. God could have chosen to annihilate the entire earth, just get rid of the whole creation. But that was never his plan. He wants a relationship with us. He has always wanted a relationship with us. And so the evil is cast away, righteous remains, and God continues a relationship. And in the end, of course, that is what's going to happen. Death being the final enemy, Christ will through his blood reconcile all of us to God forever, the one time and you're done. So it isn't just judgment, it's reconciliation. And through Noah now, he wants to give the creation, if you will, a second chance. So with that, let's go ahead now. Jim's been studying all week, I can tell over here. He's just dying to get into this. Of course, what I should probably do first is pass out some scripture things for folks to read. And shoot those around. But absolutely fascinating. And I said there's a movie coming out, at least one, or maybe two movies coming out March and April from Hollywood on the story about Noah and what it would have been like on the ark, what it would have been like when they came off, all of that. And we saw previews of one of them at the Willow Creek meeting last fall, and it looks totally awesome. All right, so if someone has, we'll start just with Genesis 9, verse 1 for a minute. The question is, what did God command Noah and his 3 sons to do after the flood? Genesis 9:1.
And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth.
What has God commanded Adam and Eve to do when he created them? Same thing. It's interesting about the whole birth control thing, which we won't get into today, but God's desire from the beginning of his creation is to fill the earth with mankind. He wants to fill the earth with mankind. And so he tells Noah and his sons, get out there and procreate, populate the earth through you and your descendants. And then the second question I ask is, what was now different about the relationship between man and animal, which Jim was getting to, and so who has Genesis 9, 2, and 3?
The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, and as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything.
Yeah, so lots of things changed right here. We have a new environment we're living in. Now,
spent a year taking care of these animals,
yeah,
and now they're scared of you. And they're
yeah, because of the care you gave them, probably. Yeah, so, yeah, you come off the ark after having cared for them for a year, but you were actually being God's steward of the animals. They didn't belong to you to begin with. They were out somewhere else and were led in for that one special year. But what it tells us is prior to the flood, then, what was the relationship with man and animal? Friendly.
friendly.
What did animals eat back then? Plants. They planted. Everybody was a vegetarian, very similar to what the Bible describes as the new heaven and new earth, where the lion and the lamb lay down together and the snake doesn't bite and all of that. That's how it was at the time of Adam and Eve. So if we're studying about dinosaurs who were meat eaters, what period of time are we talking about? After the flood. And I've mentioned this before. There's a theory that much of what we know and understand or are trying to understand about the earth and the creation and all these other things, we're measuring off of post-flood things. Because the dinosaurs, obviously, if you're going to take a literal biblical meaning, they didn't eat meat until after the flood. So not only do Noah and his sons and wives come off the boat into this new blue sky environment, now we're going to eat meat for the first time. Never had it before, I've always found that interesting. They were sacrificing animals, but never had a desire to eat meat before. Now, I've heard an interesting theory about why this is now so, that God says to eat meat, because when the vapor barrier collapsed, and now we're exposed to all the harmful UV rays and all these other changes in the environment and whatnot, we needed the nutrients that come from meat. We don't know that from the Bible. God just says eat meat. But that's the theory, is that the environment would have changed so much that the human, we would have needed some of that, because there are benefits from eating meat in spite of what diet people will try to tell you. Lean meat, I might add. Okay, so we have two things happening, and now we're going to eat meat, and oh, by the way, don't pet the lion anymore. And we've had, sad stories in the news every year, people who think they're cozy with some wild animal, and then suddenly the animal is wild. And they're no longer cozy any longer, including the Shamu the whale incident a few years back down in Florida and so on. I think we desire to have that kind of relationship with animals. All of us like a cuddly little, wouldn't it be nice to have a tiger in the house? But that is not what God says here. And God says here is we are going to be seen as their enemy. Birds in the air as well, did you notice? We tend to latch on to now the lion wants to tear you apart, but even birds in the air are not keen on us, especially those we stick in cages. So completely new environment. So you have to learn, don't pet the snake. And yes, you can eat that lamb over there. Interesting. Just a completely new world. Okay, question 3. What did God specifically command Noah and his family in Genesis 9:7?
As for you, be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it.
So how'd they do in that one? This is a commandment from God. Multiply on the earth, increase upon the earth. We want lots of babies. They didn't do it. Did they? Why are we here today? We're actually going to talk about that one next week, I believe. That's a good one, actually. What did they do? We're going to read as we get into next week's lesson. They basically went to the bottom of the mountain and camped. And we end up with something called the Tower of Babel. Because they were all in one voice, they were all united, nobody wanted to, they were, sort of fat, dumb, and happy. That's right. Plenty of wine, apparently, too, at the time. No, they didn't populate the earth. They stayed together, and worse, again, I'm getting into next week's lesson now, they turned against God. Can you believe this? And they built this tower. Why? To raise themselves above God, to show that they were higher than he was. How incredible. We've just talked about, wait a minute, this is God you're messing with here. He brought you through the flood, and here are some, I don't know, you can add it up, although I wouldn't do that, but so many thousand years later, here's the Tower of Babel going up around, I think, 3,500 or so. I'll have to look the date up for you. But in any case, no, they didn't. Nobody dispersed. This is basically around the Mount Ararat area. Just this great, big, giant group of people all speaking the same language and little camps and villages and whatnot, but going nowhere. And then God took care of that as well. So no, they ignored that. They had the populating part right. Scatter all over the earth? No, didn't do that. What did God covenant with Noah, and how did God seal that covenant? This is a very well-known story. Who has Genesis 9, 8 through 17?
Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all of those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. Establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be cut off by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth. So God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant, and I have established between me and all of the life on earth.
So, what did he covenant?
Never destroy all life again.
With the waters.
With water. Yeah. He didn't covenant never destroy all life again. He said with a flood. And he did what? He set his bow in the sky. And something that we just take for granted all the time, the rainbows pop up. What, Judy, what did it say in the end there, every time God sees a rainbow?
He will remember his everlasting covenant.
Yeah. It says in verse 16, when the bow is in the cloud, then I will look upon it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. So we take them for granted. God looks at them. And that's an incredible thing to think of, too. When you see a rainbow, God's looking at that rainbow and remembering his covenant with Noah thousands of years ago. And just amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So there's an interesting thing about that rainbow. I've read that it wouldn't have been possible, the kind of rainbow we see, it would not have been possible with the vapor barrier. That you see the kind of rainbow you see, again, because it's gone, and the way ozone and other things layer up and light's reflected through it and so on, that's how we get the rain. They could not have had that kind of rainbow prior to the flood. So when Noah saw that rainbow, it would have been the absolute first time a rainbow had been on the earth. And that would have been spectacular in itself. God's talking to you, and he says, I set my bow in the sky, and then this big rainbow comes up, and this little Irish guy runs over with a bucket of gold and puts it at the end. That would have just been marvelous, you know. But imagine, imagine that you're talking with God. I mean, that's the other part of this. Noah had a relationship like they had, like Adam and Eve had in the garden, talking with God. It just, oh my goodness, just incredible. Okay. So then we go to question 5, and this comes from 9:18. So we have a bunch of, we're going to skip a lot of that who begat who thing in there and hit the highlights. So Genesis 9:18, who is the father of the Canaanites? Ham. So we have Noah. We have 3 sons. Shem and Japheth. Is it Jepeth? Did I do that right? Sorry?
Japheth.
Pheth. Okay. The P is silent. No, the K is silent. The K is silent. The K is silent. Julie's over here. What K? What K? Okay. So Ham is going to be the father of the Canaanites. Okay, and I never can spell Canaan right. There we go. 2 L's. Very good. Sham's going to be the father of the Shemites. The Shemites. We'll put Shemites down, that's fine. Also known as what? The Semites. And the Semites, that's where we get your anti-Semitic. You're prejudiced against the Jews as an example, although the Jews are not the only Semites in the Middle East. But all of the Semite tribes come from Shem. as much as they probably would like to be called Shemites. That didn't work out quite that way. And then Japheth would be the other nations that are listed there. But these are the two right now that are important to us, and that's what you need to understand as well, is what God's revealing in these two chapters, again, isn't some chronology of genealogy for the sake of recording history. This is to show us from Genesis 1:1 to the end of Revelation, God's plan of redemption for man. And these two are significant. Why are the Canaanites significant? They are the enemies of God. Remember, we said before, you're either a son of Seth or you're a son of Cain. And here, this is an exact picture again. Here's three sons born to Noah. Here's this guy here. Forget it, From the Canaanites, what's going to happen? And again, I know I'm getting into a little bit of next week's lesson, but what happens down here? Who's this guy that shows up? Anybody remember? Nimrod, the mighty hunter. And Nimrod will basically be the beginning of two great nations. What would they be? If you get this one right, you get a real gold star. That is correct. And it turns out that the founders of both are related, and when we get into that study, we'll see that. We started in Assyria with the Assyrian Empire. One of their relatives goes over here to rule this smaller area and eventually rises up and becomes a Babylonian Empire. But, yeah, this is the Assyrians, and the Babylonians will come from Nimrod. And, of course, we know out of here, what are we going to get from here? We're going to get the Jews and the followers of Islam, right? Abraham is going to come down this line, right? And then he has two. We know the story. If you don't, we will in a couple of weeks because we're going to cover that. That's why this is in there. Not for us to add up a bunch of years and go, oh, well, the flood happened 1,306 years ago. No, there's a lot of stuff missing. This is just to show us this line, and of course, from here, we'll get to Christ. And I've brought in before Christ's family tree. You all have seen that poster thing. I'll bring it in when we get over to Abraham. That also shows how this plays out. But that's why I asked the question. I wanted you to see that in these two chapters, the lineage for the enemies of God was going to come through Ham. Who was the youngest of Noah's three sons? And we have a verse for that, Genesis 9:24 and 10:6.
When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him,
Oh.
he said, "Cursed." Oh, sorry, I kept going.
No, it's okay. You can curse him too. That's okay. So, okay. And then Genesis 10:6 says,
The sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan.
oh, I thought it talked about him being young. That's okay. All right. Yeah, so the youngest of the three, I don't know that we know the ages of the other two. We don't believe they were triplets. Somebody tried to argue that one time. They could have been, but probably not. But Ham was the youngest of the three and is the one who makes a fool out of his dad while he's naked and drunk and gets cursed and all these other things happen. So how long, here we go. So we're going to read Genesis 9:19 through 20 because the question is, how long after the flood waters receded was it when Noah got drunk? So again, the most common version of this story is Noah stumbles off the ark. Whew, glad that's over. Give me a bottle of wine. And then there's a big argument about, did they have wine were they capable of even making wine before the flood? It was a perfect environment. How would you ferment wine? Which is a lot of hooey, by the way. We'll talk about that too. But a lot of people think Noah came off the ark. Whew, let's party. Got stone drunk that day, and all this stuff happened. It was not the case. So who has those verses?
These were the three sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the earth. Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard.
I thought we had the whole thing there.
Well, it's 20.
Yeah, go ahead and read the, sorry, thought I'd,
When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. Continue.
yeah.
Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked in backward and covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way so that they would not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves. Will he be to his brothers?"
Yeah. So, we have a lot of good information in here. The first thing it does is it calls Noah man of the soil. And do we remember Cain? What was Cain?
Well, same thing.
Same thing, right? It wasn't Cain the one that brought the baskets of fruit and he was out in his field and he called, Seth out to the, Abel out to the field and slew Abel in his field and all that. Cain was, so here's another indicator. We talked about this when we were talking about Cain. It wasn't the fact that he sowed, grew grapes in the field or whatever it was that made Cain's offering. It was his attitude. Here's Noah, man of the soil. God found him righteous. It's about what's in here. It isn't about our exterior things. I mean, we have to behave accordingly, but it's our inner motivation and our relationship with God. So here's Noah, man of the soil. So what would that mean relative to making a vineyard? He probably knew how, right? I'm going to go out on a theological limb and say I think they had wine before the flood. Why wouldn't they not have had wine? Particularly when we read, you're going to have to close the door, sorry. Particularly when we read why God wanted to destroy man. What did God say about man at the time? Yeah, no, exactly. That's what he said, right? He said their heart is evil continually, right? But they were stone sober and didn't drink wine? I bet you. I'm thinking we're talking orgies and all sorts of stuff. Lots of things like we see in the news today, probably. All kinds of bizarre things that are all, an abomination to God. You couldn't have had grapes back then, or you couldn't have had wine back then because that would have meant that they had to go bad. They had to sour or whatnot. For some reason, people have the impression that the earth God created before the flood was perfect in every way. And yet we know when we studied Adam and Eve, what did he tell Adam and Eve to do in the garden? Besides populate the earth. Take care of it. Cultivate the garden. If there weren't weeds and, the things we would tend to see as imperfect, what was there to take care of? And pick the fruit before, get it when it's ripe and all that. To me, I think that Noah didn't just wake up in the ark knowing how to grow a vineyard. I think he knew before the flood.
Even if he knew how to grow a vineyard, how would he know how to make wine?
No. So I'm saying he had all this knowledge before the flood. And they get off the ark. They're of the soil. We just said at the beginning of the lesson, they're self-sufficient. Let's get some crops in the ground. We got nice soil. Right, the soil would have been perfect for growing stuff. Oh, wow. Would have been absolutely perfect for it. Let's get some crops going. We're going to have to eat, and it takes a while for that to go. We've only got these supplies left, and so on. And he plants a vineyard. Anybody ever been around a vineyard? How long does it take till they get the first grapes they can begin to make wine with?
Couple of years.
It's 4 to 6, I think, isn't it? I think 4 minimum, I think. And I'm not a vineyard guy, but I think it's 4 years, I think, is the minimum. Just to get the grape, if you get it right the first time, just to get the grape. And then you got the winemaking process, which takes, at least 2. Yeah, at least 2. Now, Beaujolais wine, I think Beaujolais is a 1-year wine. Otherwise, the rest of them are 2 or more, I think, the processing of it and so on, before you can bottle it, before you can uncork it and drink it. Yeah, I think it's 2 years. I think.
Made it in a day.
Jesus made it in an instant. Yeah, you betcha. So we're talking 5, 6, 7 years here before we got alcohol that we can get drunk. I don't get the sense that Noah wanted to get drunk either. I don't like that picture of him either. I think we just, first of all, the first fruit off of a tree is the sweetest. We lived in Hawaii and had a mango tree. The first mango we picked off, oh my goodness, and the farmers over there told us the first crop of a fruit tree is the sweetest you'll ever get off the tree. I'm thinking that he got wine a tad stronger than he anticipated he was going to get, and you're in this new environment, and boom, the alcohol just went right to him, I'm thinking. We don't get any sense from the description of this that he was having some wild orgy party thing. I think he just he didn't realize how strong the wine was going to be. I'll give him that. But this obviously happened years after the flood. And to even say 6 or 7, we're assuming he got off the ark and that day started the vineyard. We don't know. But it's obviously years after the flood. Noah didn't come through that door. Whew, I'm glad we're safe. Give me a drink. They didn't do that. They just did not. And then, of course, Ham, makes fun out of his dad, and we're familiar with that story. Gets cursed as a result of it. And it is interesting to see that in a handful of years, from when God's brought them through that judgment, here's a son that's bad, I guess is what I would call it. What else does this tell us in terms of not just Ham being the youngest, but in terms of family and our relationship with God and raising our children and all of that? What does this show us?
I think one of the things is that a parent can do everything they can, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all your children are going to follow Jesus.
Yeah. Just because the parents are, I'll say, righteous in God's eyes, they're probably not righteous themselves, but righteous in God's eyes, and raise the child with the rod and in a Christian way and all those things. No, because individually we are to have a relationship with God, and there is an age. I think legally we pick 12 or something, but there's an age where that person is then responsible for their relationship with God and their own behavior. And the rearing of the child ends, and the child becomes even a young adult, if you will, and responsible, and they begin to make decisions themselves. And certainly Ham is a good example of that. Samuel's son, here's a first prophet of God, raised, in the best environment you could be raised in the most evil, corrupt thing. Oh my goodness. And you can just see example, David's sons and so on and so on. So when we're beating ourselves up, which we do, and Sherry and I do on a regular basis, because we're having a difficult time with one of our children or grandchildren or something, what could we have done that we didn't do and all that? Sometimes it's not you. That's not to say we're not responsible, but it's not you. There's a point where that person has to take responsibility for their actions. But here's amazing. Here, just have gone through everything they went through. Fine if Ham's children misbehaved. They weren't there for that. Ham experienced the whole 100-year building the ark, all of it. And his father being right, telling them, listen, we got to do this. It's going to, describing what's going to happen. It all happens. I would think God and Noah, among his 3 sons, would have been highly lifted up. But apparently not in Ham's case. The other 2 sons showed a lot more maturity and handled it much better. And then the last question that I had, in addition to Ham being the father of the Canaanites, he was also the father of Cush, Cush the father of Nimrod. Why is this significant? And now we'll go ahead and read, I've already sort of laid it out, but we'll read it anyway. Genesis 10, 8 through 20. Who got that? Oh, good. Couldn't happen to. So it's just Smith and Jones.
Yeah, Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, and the land of Shinar. From that land he went to Assyria and built Nivea, Rehoboth, well, okay, I don't know.
Yeah.
Kala and Resen. Between Nivea and Kala, that is the principal city. Nizam, you got Nizam. Really need all this.
All right, you can skip over some of the begats if you like.
And in Canaan begot Sidon his firstborn, and Heth, the Jebusite, the Amorite, and the Girgashite.
Okay, and the Hivite and the Arachite and the Sinite and the Arvadite and the Zeramite and the Hamathite, and afterwards the families of the Canaanite were spread abroad afterwards. This is after, remember, were spread abroad. The territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon as you go toward Gerar as far as Gaza, as you go toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and Adama and Zeboim, and as far as Lasha. So even back, the writers of Genesis during the time of Moses knew about Sodom and Gomorrah because it was laid out as territorial boundaries. These are the sons of Ham, according to their families, according to their languages, by their lands and by their nations. And then Shem's is called out, and then Japheth is called out, and that typically ends 10, and we'll pick up with Babel next week. I'm sorry, 2 weeks. We're not meeting next week. We'll pick up with Babel in 2 weeks. But as I said before, the thing that's interesting here is that Nimrod starts many centers, all evil. And if we had the time to go and follow the history of each of those, Akkad and so on, they're all enemies of the Semites. Two in particular that we know about very well in the Bible is Babel, which eventually will become Babylon. Of course, we know about the tower. And Nineveh. And what was the only good thing about Nineveh? Jonah. God got Jonah's mind turned around, and for 100+ years, there were righteous people living in Nineveh. But aside from that little period of time, Nineveh was a violent enemy and had really nasty ways of dealing with their enemies. So this is just an evil line all the way down through here, and this will lead eventually to Assyria, coming out of Nineveh. That was the capital of Assyria, and then eventually Babylon, the city, being the capital of the Babylonians. And if I could draw a good map, basically you start in the center of Turkey and work your way down this way and work your way out that way. That's what's being described in these verses in terms of settlements. And we know Turkey as an example. So a little bit, we'll just sort of do this. This being the Mediterranean. You're over in here, and again, I'm geographically challenged. Mount Ararat and whatnot is over in that area. And so we're in a big sweeping move. It's sort of like this is the general area that we're talking about. And this will be the Assyrians. The Babylonians will be down here. You're going to have something called, come down this way. Anybody recognize what that might be? That is the Fertile Crescent. This is Egypt over here. This is the Nile, and you're going to come across and down through the Tigris and the Euphrates and so on. And when you look at like a GPS of the area, this is green, this massive green belt all along this thing called the Fertile Crescent. And it's where populations obviously would settle because there was water and agriculture and all those things. And then in between is a big desert over in here. So Assyria will start up here. They'll spread their kingdom down to Babylon. And then eventually the Babylonians will overthrow the Assyrians, come this way. Meanwhile, Egypt is over here along the Nile. And the southern Nile is Thebes. You've heard of the city of Thebes. And then the northern Nile, which is where the Jews were. And the Egyptians are building up their empire over here while all that's going on. And then interesting alliances begin to develop, and all these Canaanite places in between have to pick one or the other, and there's lots of politics. And from here, a tribe of people hit a couple of islands in the Mediterranean and eventually settle on the coastline of Canaan, and they will become known as the Philistines. And that's how all that happens. Okay. Clear as mud. Didn't, oh, I love what, bad enough on the board to start with. Okay, so that was a quick, here's where everybody came from thing, very loosely defined. So next week then, we don't meet. 2 weeks, we'll do the Tower of Babel, and it's cool. It's really cool to take a look at what transpired from there. So that'll be our lesson in 2 weeks. So we have 2 minutes if anybody has a question. I see somebody in Whitefish, Montana raising their hand. Hi, Jim Merrifield and Martha. They're not in Whitefish, they're in another Montana. Missoula? Missoula. Hi, Jim and Martha in Missoula. They study with us by video and by lesson. Okay.